250th BlockTalks, we speak with Wesley Rios, US and LATAM Partnerships Lead at Morph Network, who tells us about his transition from traditional payments to crypto. I'm your host, Mauricio Magaldi, and this is Block Drops, your weekly digest on blockchain for business. These news are not a form of endorsement, sponsorship, or encouragement for consumption, and are meant for educational purposes only. All right, everybody, I'm here with Wesley Rios, who's going to tell us who he is and what he does with blockchain. Wesley, welcome to BlockTalks.
Hey, Mauricio, thanks for having me. So happy to be here. Yeah, a little bit about me. The partnership lead for the US and Latin America for Morph. I joined the company about 3 months ago. Come from a traditional finance background, so I'm new in this Web3 space and learning a tons and meeting people like you, and so excited about this conversation.
Most people, as you and as me, had a previous career not in crypto, not in Web3, not in digital assets, not in blockchain.
Yeah.
But most people in financial services have been exposed to crypto about a decade ago. So what's your story with crypto? You're joining the industry now, but have you had any exposure in what that was? And why didn't you take the plunge before now?
Well, that's a really good question. You know, exposure to crypto, I think for me, it really came around maybe 4 years ago, right? When I was working MasterCard. One of the areas that I was focused on is working with fintechs. So think about MasterCard is a traditional payment network. All clients up to that moment, most of them were just traditional banks, right? And then all of a sudden we have this wave of fintech coming with great ideas and amazing digital experience for financial service. And then that's when I started hearing about crypto, right? Because they were sort of ahead of the curve, talking about, okay, in addition to ability to have a completely digital onboarding, there's this whole space here. And that's how I sort of got into it. And then at MasterCard, you have to sort of redefine some of the onboarding and processes that you have. And digital asset was one of those topics, like, how do we handle this, right? This doesn't fit in the playbook that we have today. And I went down the rabbit hole, and the more I learned about it, I was like, wow, this is actually very transformational. But now everyone's talking about, crypto, but not from a sort of a, speculation perspective, or much more from a utility perspective, right? And that's where traditional finance comes in. And that's why I'm so excited about my current role, because it really allows me to sort of bring, the traditional finance experience into a whole new space that can definitely create a much better payment experience in products on top of this new rails, which is basically blockchain rails, right?
I love that. And I also love that as a late entrant in this space, in being a TradFi guy by trade, there's a lot of overlap now being sort of converged or not normalized in terms of even the vocabulary is changing. Like we were in Paris not long ago and we chatted about the dress code, right? I was wearing a blazer, very uncommon for me to wear a blazer at a conference, but there were maybe 4 people in Proof of Talk wearing hoodies, and the ratio has dramatically changed. You had people like your former employer, MasterCard, on the stage talking about stablecoin settlement.
Yep.
You had people like Citibank talking about how many trillions tokenization markets are going to look like RWAs in 2030, 2035, and they have a logic to that. And none of that would have happened without blockchains being pervasive and crypto being a novel asset class and technology that allows all of that. So the blend is very appreciated. Now, as you joined the industry in stride, what were the first couple of things that called your attention, both positive and negative? Because I know there's 2 sides to every story, so I want to hear your first impressions on joining from MasterCard to Morph. What were the things in crypto, as with your hands-on experience, that you're like, well, this is amazing, we're going to be able to do a lot of that? And what were the other things that said, oh, this really sucks, we shouldn't be doing this?
I think the first thing is the speed, right? The ability for you to be able to have this sort of a permissionless perspective and be able to come together and say, hey, we can build this. And the whole sort of a open approach to to sort of a collaboration. I think that's very unique to the crypto space. I think that everyone sees each other as builders, right? The builder mindset. How do I deliver a new product experience? And we can do that, and we don't need to ask permission to anyone to do that. So I think that's amazing. And the advantage is just very useful when you are looking to be able to launch new products and service, right? So that is one thing that is extremely positive. The negative side is when you actually launch something within financial service, you really need to think about the edge cases, right? And the edge cases are the ones that you need to worry about, not just the happy path that usually, payments happen most of the time. But, the edge cases, you need to have a plan for it. And some of those have, if you don't get it right, you have some high risk, you have regulatory obligation, you have compliance requirement. So I think that piece of it is something that is lacking. But I think, like you said, even the terminology is shifting, right? People are not really talking about crypto payment. They talk about on-chain payments, right? So it's more palatable, to say the least. And so I guess that's really bringing this sort of like risk management perspective, because at the end of the day, you are building a financial service that other parties are going to rely on to run their business, their lives on. And you cannot just hope that it works, right? It needs to work every single time. And if it doesn't work, you need to have a plan for it. And that's why it's so important to talk about utility. And I think that's one of the biggest upside opportunity where traditional finance can come and bring that discipline to Web3.
That is an important perspective. I think it speaks to the concept of responsible innovation, which is something that I've touched on the podcast multiple times, and multiple guests, particularly the ones that have migrated from TradFi, they usually carry with them this concept of responsible innovation, because it's just something we learn as we build in banks and in financial services, because there's no excuse. As you said, the regulators are always looking, and if you step out of the line, there's only so many times that you're going to be allowed to do that while you innovate. And if blockchains are to be the provable, trustless infrastructure of the world, then the responsibility of those building it and on it needs to carry at the same time. And I fully subscribe to that. Now, I'm a sucker for use cases. And I want to know from your perspective, which ones are the most interesting that you found as you land anew in the industry, in terms of either novelty or things that you may have tried to do in your TradFi career that were impossible, but now they are because of the technologies there. So what are your favorite use cases in the recent months?
Yeah, and this is one thing that I discuss a lot with my team. And I think sometimes, there is this sort of blanket assumption that traditional finance is just broken, right? And one thing that I've learned, worked out at MasterCard, at JP Morgan, at Citi, is that always in a payment role is that in payments, there is not one size fits all, right? So actually there are systems that work extremely well, like the real-time payments in Brazil, PIX, that's an example. It's contained, it's within one market time. There is no need for blockchain there, right? FedNow in the US and other real-time payment rails. Now, in the current system, whenever you want to cross border or cross currents, that's when the system is fragmented. And fragmentation means slow time, high cost, because then you have to go through a web of banks to move money from point A to point B, right? And every bank has its own ledger, it has its own settlement window, its own processes, and as you go from one to the other, you're adding time to it and you're adding cost to it, right? So clearly, for a stablecoin, the biggest opportunity is when the system is most fragmented, because now you can have a unified settlement layer where you can allow cross-border payments to actually flow instantaneously. And that, for me, those are the use cases that are most interesting, right? Merchants, they operate in multiple markets to be able to receive funds sooner, right? Better cash flow for them, better operation. Digital marketplace, they're looking to be able to pay creators, looking to pay collaborators. Now they can do that with global reach via a blockchain settlement layer. So all those use cases where you have to cross border and you have to cross currency and you can have global reach in 24/7 digital dollars that is instant finality and programmability. That's where you have blockchain as enormous opportunity to be able to rewire how we move money globally.
You've been with Morph for 3-4 months now. If you can disclose it, you don't need to talk about your clients, but what were the things that you brought to market that speak to that opportunity or capturing that opportunity for you guys right now?
Yeah, I think one of the key things that I brought to Morph was the concept of let's talk about the use cases. Let's look at the corridors where, money is flowing today, right? Let's look within those corridors. What are the type of flows that are happening? What type of payments that are happening? Because today they're happening. Business need to collect money, send money, pay people, and those are happening today in a very inefficient way when you have to cross border. So what I brought was this discipline to, okay, let's take this from a top down, look at the corridor, within the corridor, look at the subflows. For each one of those flows, what is the whole ecosystem that we have to have in place end to end to be able to enable that, to be able to come to a blockchain settlement layer and be able to enable the parties that are actually participating in that specific flow to benefit from a much better rails, right? So that they can actually move money faster. They can actually have better liquidity management. So that discipline of really approaching the market from understanding what the volume exists today, right? What type of volume it is, what is the use case that's driving that, and how a better blockchain settlement layer brings benefit, that then we can deliver value to the parties that are participating in that specific transaction, right? And one of the key things that I like to really talk to the team is payments is not just moving data from point A to point B, right? Payments is actually a relationship between a sender and a receiver. And with every relationship, there is expectation, there are responsibility, and therefore you're not just providing the technology where you're moving, information token from wallet A to wallet B. You have all those other components that you have to have in place to enable that to be delivered. So that's the discipline and this sort of a lens, looking at the use case, looking at the market, looking where the pain points are, and where we can actually add value. Not just building for the sake of building, the building to be able to help companies be better in moving money globally.
I think that's the right approach to things. I mean, being a product person, you do want to, solve actual tangible problems. Now, you talked about, this not being more like a speculative market, or we're leaving that era into more of a utility stage for digital assets and blockchain. Where are the opportunities, in your opinion and your recent assessment, for traditional financial firms like the MasterCards, like the Bank of Americas, and the traditional financial services, to, other than the technology, other than the utility, but in terms of asset classes, like we're thinking RWAs, we're thinking stable coins, but where do you see a business opportunity that has not yet been tapped? Because as we were talking about in Paris, like we're seeing all these TradFi companies coming in, and there's only one use case, which is stable coins. Some of them are talking RWAs because there's some value in fractional ownership. There's some value in expedited collateral management. But in your assessment, where are they not there yet that they should be focusing on, that you in your new capacity can maybe help them capture that opportunity?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I don't have a very clear answer for that, right? Because I think that right now, in the existing size of the market, just for payments, stablecoin is still very underpenetrated, right? It's a very small percentage of the existing payment flows that go cross-border. They're actually leveraging all the benefit of blockchain. So I think there is a lot of a runway for us to go through down that path. And that's why if you see traditional finance, they're focused on payments. The acquisition they're doing is literally how they can become the network of networks, right? How they can enable multi-rail payments across different types. Because card payments did not replace bank transfer, just like real-time payments did not replace card networks, right? Stablecoin is not going to replace all those other different payment systems. They're going to coexist. Now, with that saying, the ability for leverage, real world assets into the economics of payments, it's something that is still very early. And I think that is a lot to do with how do you, from a treasury perspective, optimize your balance sheet, right? When you're looking at cross-border payments and you have to pre-fund accounts in multiple markets and you have all that capital just locked in there, trapped without utilization, there are ways for you to bring real-world assets that allow you to have better intraday collateral to be able to enable those payment flows to happen. And therefore, you are much more efficient manage your liquidity management, right? I think that's the unlock within the scope of payments. I think there are a bunch of other unlocks that can happen on the asset management side. And that is a space that I think we need to watch really closely. But also, it's a space that you have to have very clear investor protection, which is a big topic. Therefore, how do you benefit from the decentralization while maintaining the investor protection? It's going to be a key unlock and sort of problem space for people to solve for. But from my perspective, the payments, I think we're so early. There is so much efficient you can to transition, all the payment flows that we have onto blockchain that I think that, for me, there is enough to keep me busy. I think we're in some of the markets, we're very early stage, right? I'm talking to companies that are really looking at, they're making payments that are taking 3 to 5 to 7 days, and they have to worry about banking holidays. There are companies that are looking to pre-fund accounts on Friday, just in case they need to make payments on Saturday, and they have their money sitting there. There is so much low-hanging fruits for us to be able to go after and help those businesses improve their operation. That's enough to keep me busy at the moment.
One of the things that also popped up in Paris, and I'm seeing more and more, and I have yet to be convinced that this is going to pick up the volume that the researchers are predicting. And it's the agentic economy, the agentic finance, agentic payments. Regardless of what the volume is going to look like, I think everyone needs to be prepared to do machine-to-machine payments because there's going to be a lot of intelligence being shared and demanded. And then obviously someone has to pay for their compute, someone has to pay for the API access, someone has to pay for, which makes sense to have payments associated with agents. What is your forecast on that? What is your personal take on that prospect? Is this something that you're, putting any chips on? Is this a concern? Are we doomed because AI is going to end it all? What's your read on that?
We need to have that on the roadmap, right? The concept of headless merchant, it's going to be a reality. The decision is going to move away from humans going out there and discovering new products and services and going through that experience themselves. I think it's going to get to a point that they're going to delegate that to an agent. And then the way the agent is going to interact with the merchant and the concept of brand as well, and the relationship the brand has with the consumer is also going to shift, right? So the question really becomes is when that's going to happen. And anything related to commerce, anything related to payments, it really comes down to trust. And I think as consumers start seeing the benefit, okay, I can do better discovery. I can actually save money if I use a particular agent to be able to help me with a specific shopping experience. Then you start seeing volume transition over to that, right? Now, that's very early stage at the moment. I think the machine-to-machine commerce will definitely require new rails, right? It cannot really rely for payments on the traditional payment products that we have today, card payments, as an example, just because the fact that they're not built for machine, they're built for humans. Therefore, if you look for a digital commerce, right, you need to have the right infrastructure. You need to have something that is 24/7, something that enables the economic value of a very small transaction to actually be real, right? And you need to have the ability to be able to make an instant settlement. And I think blockchain is well positioned to be that payment choice for those type of transaction where you have agents doing microtransaction. Now, what is the use case that is going to unlock that? I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball at this moment. I think that is a trend. I think the reality is that as people start to use AI agents more and more on the daily, and that sort of confidence level is there, then they're going to feel more comfortable to be able to provide them with a payment credential. As long as you have the right controls around the payment credential, then the opportunity really becomes is how does that become a reality in a 24/7 commerce where the agents are going to decide by themselves and make transactions that make sense based on their, sort of reasoning. So that's definitely an area that we should focus on. But I think we're very early to be able to make any speculation what is going to be the killer use case. I think that at this moment, it's maybe around trading, right? I think that that's the easier sort of space. That's not really specifically related to a consumer paying for something or maybe a treasury looking for a better way to do settlements real time. But I think we're going to get there somehow.
Yeah, I'm with you on the guardrails because I'm a former IBMer, and one of the things that IBM had on the playbook, and there's plenty of the photo of the manual going around the internet these days, is being able to describe that the computer can't make decisions on your behalf. Someone has to be liable for whatever the computer does. And I think the guardrails narrow that window, and they need to be there. But there's going to be a lot of legislation and regulation to define if something goes wrong in that narrow window, who gets the blame, right? Who gets the liability? Who gets to be called out in court? Because the agent's not going to show up in court. The cloud computing or the AI provider is not going to show up in court. It's your agent that you prompted. Will you be there? And how do I know who are you in a world where the agents are running on chain? Comes back to all the way into the bottom of the stack, which is identity, which I think also blockchains in general can help resolve or alleviate the identity management issue. But I'm with you there.
I think one of the key areas is liability shift, right? When you have a transaction, you always have to think about the liability within that transaction. And for a agent that makes a decision autonomously, someone has to delegate that to that person. But then how do you trace that? And how do you control that? And those are all the things that, we're going to have to resolve. Just like we have today in existing payment systems, right? There is a whole liability chain. Whenever someone does not fulfill a specific step or they do not follow the rules in the acquiring the transaction, a merchant, then they are the ones liable because they did not actually follow what was agreed on. So that's going to be definitely an area that it should be much more detailed out for machine-to-machine commerce.
You are Brazilian. We're speaking in English, but you are Brazilian.
Yeah.
What is your Brazilian story? Because I know you live in the U.S. and you've lived in the U.S. for quite some time. So what's the back end of that? I mean, how did that start? How did you end up in the U.S., by the way?
Yeah, so long story short, I'm from Salvador, Bahia. That's where I spent most of my childhood. Actually, I was born in Recife, which is in the northeast of Brazil. My mother was a professor. She was a sociology professor. And she went as a visit professor to University of Georgia when I was actually in high school. And that's when I actually ended up going to the US. So my first city that I landed in the US was Atlanta. And I remember the ride that my mother took me from there to our new home, where she was in Athens, Georgia. That's the city where University of Georgia is based. And since then, even before I went to the US, I was always very tech forward. I'm an engineer by training. So I studied computer engineering. And I always, wanted to be part of NASA. So I always had that sort of aspiration when I was little. And, coming to the US, studying engineering. And then actually my first internship was with NASA after my freshman year of college. So it was sort of kind of like a full circle. And my mother, she was a single mother. So, she made all that possible. So that's how I ended up in the US. So once in the US, the first company that I worked after Virginia Tech, that's where I went to school, was actually MicroStrategy. That just happens to be very big in Bitcoin now, right? But back then, they were ahead of their time. They were actually doing business intelligence before machine learning was something. And I worked with, at MicroStrategy. I met Michael Saylor very early on. The company was growing, tremendously, and then it had some hiccups, and everything changed. But that's how I got into sort of the technology side, and then from there I went into a career. Did my MBA in Europe, joined Citi, their training program. Had the opportunity to work across different markets: Egypt, Europe, the US, and then Latin America. So it's been a journey, a very sort of a pleasant career, always looking to be on the ground and learn from people and work with people from different cultures. So yes, but my home is always Brazil. Every time I go to Salvador, that's when I feel at home.
I love that. We have an astronaut in crypto now. That's great. That is so cool. That is really cool. In terms of now that you're in the industry, this is 24/7. It doesn't stop. The blockchains keep pushing out blocks no matter what. How do you keep yourself healthy and sane working in an industry that just refuses to stop?
I think that you have to really be very disciplined and give yourself the space, right? To be able to just sort of unlock and focus on all the things that really matters. And I think that for me, that is one of the key things that I've learned. Even in traditional finance, you know how stressful those environments are, specific around when you have major launch and key stakeholders participating, in the process. I think that you have to be, as a human being, understand that you have specific limitation, both emotionally as well as physically, and you have to really give yourself the permission to take a break. And that's one thing that I do. I also have a very strong routine. I wake up really early in the morning. I have my five in the morning routine that I stick to it. It really allows me to be able to start the day with intention and be able to hit the things that I want to hit, both on the professional but also on the personal side. All those things are part of what I've sort of learned to incorporate as I went through my journey. Right, I hit many walls, and those walls sort of shook me up and forced me to understand that your body has its own time and you don't define it, and therefore that's so important for you to really take care of yourself.
Yeah, I mean, if we don't prioritize ourselves, then nobody will. I'm with you there. Looking more broadly in like an industry perspective, in your opinion, what is the one thing we must fix right now to really propel the industry forward and avoid working another decade in this and then realizing we didn't fix that thing and we didn't move forward at all? What is that one thing and why?
I think it's fragmentation, right? I think that we are coming to a crossroad where, at least from my perspective, Web3 was always about having decentralized model where value could transfer without any permission. But then if you look at as we evolve, you start seeing little islands being built on sort of this sort of concept. And therefore, the more islands have been built, now with traditional finance also coming to the picture, that really you have fragmentation across liquidity, you have fragmentation across different user experience, you have fragmentation across different sort of payment benefits. All those things are things that we really need to think about. How do we take a step back and come with a way of coordinating all of this so that we can deliver to the end customer they're going to use a specific, in my case, payment product, something that is seamless, right? And that when you go a level below, it's not a bunch of different pieces stitched together that can actually break at any moment, and they don't talk to each other, and they actually prevents you to actually be able to deliver the best experience possible to the end customer, right? So I think that the focus on really understanding exactly what the use case is, what is the pain point that we're addressing, and how do we enable this to happen seamless without actually trying to rebuild or reinvent the wheel, and be able to do that, leverage the principles that blockchain brings to the table, but also not forgetting about the discipline around compliance and reliability. How do you enable that to be able to actually tie everything together in a way that is seamless? I think that is the biggest risk that we have, right? And whenever you have early stage, you're going to be thousands of flowers blooming all over the places. And that's great. But at some moment, we have to really take a splash. Is that actually the best way to build to the end customer and be able to actually optimize how we deliver the value that we need to deliver as a industry? So that is for me the biggest sense that I see a missed opportunity. And as long as we are aware of it and we are having collaboration and that earlier mindset that you asked, what was the first thing that I really enjoy? The builder mindset. How do you build together? Then I think that you can actually be able to sort of bypass this challenge in the future.
Well, I couldn't agree more. That's a very significant aspect. It impacts security, as you said. It impacts unit economics. It impacts user experience. There's a lot there that needs fixing. And I think the big secret to unlock that is how do we achieve that kind of uniformity without losing the decentralization aspect,
Yes.
which is what makes blockchain so powerful in what it can, the value prop and how it can deliver this. That's amazing. We're about time, but for the listeners who stayed with us thus far, what would you want them to take away from this very Brazilian conversation?
I think that one of the key things that I would like to make everyone think about is traditional finance might think about risk management as the first thing that comes to mind. But it's not because it's a given. It is because it's necessary for them to actually be able to deliver amid their regulatory and their sort of compliance obligation, right? And I think for the Web3 audiences, that's not people coming in trying to sort of break apart the existing system. I think the opportunity really is how do you are able to leverage what Web3 has created, which is this amazing blockchain technology, and how do you translate that into the language of payments, in the language of compliance, in the language of reliability? And the key takeaway is welcome everyone in the Web3 community to embrace the traditional finance individuals like myself and to build together with me and with us and focus on what we want to deliver, which is a much better product to the people that are going to use this to improve their business operation, their lives, or what have you. So that's what I would actually say as a takeaway to everyone that is listening to us.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the funnest experiences I had in Paris was when I first met you, and you asked if you were welcome. Being a TradFi guy, and yes, you're more than welcome. And I think it's just the coming of age, and the degens like myself will have to learn to coexist because it's still permissionless. There's still space for everyone, and every sector of the industry and every builder will address their challenges using the technology stack that's laid upon them. So yes, you're very welcome. And this was a pleasure. Wesley, thank you so much, and hopefully to see you somewhere around the world again in no time.
Thank you so much, Mauricio.
Thank you. Catch us online. We're on Instagram at BlockDrops Podcast, on Twitter at BlockDrops Pod or 0x Mauricio. We're on Lens at blockdrops.lens. We have a newsletter on LinkedIn. Write to us at blockdropspodcast@gmail.com, and you can listen to the BlockDrops Podcast at Spotify, iColab, Faberbun Tech, and all of the other major streaming platforms. Yay! Shout out to my countryman Wesley for such an inspiring journey to crypto. Don't forget to leave the ratings on your favorite player and check out the merch store at blockdropspodcast.xyz. This is all for today. Stay rare, stay weird. LFG.